For 30 years, he had run the same small-town grocery store, serving customers who barely noticed him. But when that familiar voice asked for directions to the old church, time stopped. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The woman who had promised to love him forever, then left him for a millionaire the day before their wedding. Welcome to the Untold Stories, where broken hearts find unexpected second chances. Before we dive into this powerful story of lost love, second chances, and the courage to forgive, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories of redemption and healing deserve to be shared, hit that subscribe button right now. These are the tales that remind us it's never too late to make things right, even when the heart has been shattered beyond what we thought was repairable. Matthew's Grocery had been the heart of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, for 3 generations. David Matthews had inherited the small store from his father, who had inherited it from his grandfather before him. Every morning at exactly 6 a.m., David would unlock the doors of the modest establishment and begin another day of serving the same families, who had shopped there since he was a boy, providing them with everything they needed. At 58 years old, David had settled into the comfortable rhythm of small-town life that moved at the pace of seasons rather than stock markets. He knew every customer by name, remembered their preferences, and provided the kind of personal service that had become rare in an age of corporate chains and online shopping. Millbrook was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. But there was one story that the town had eventually stopped telling. One chapter of David's life that had become ancient history, buried beneath 3 decades of quiet routine. Most of the younger residents didn't even know about the wedding that never happened, the bride who never appeared, or the man who had spent his wedding day alone at the altar, waiting for a woman who was already gone. David had been 28 then, young and full of dreams that extended far beyond the boundaries of Millbrook. He had planned to expand the family business, maybe open a second location in the county seat, build something significant with the woman he loved more than life itself. Sarah Miller had been his world, his future, his reason for believing that love could conquer any obstacle life placed in their path. They had grown up together in Millbrook, childhood sweethearts who had never doubted they were meant to be together forever. Sarah was beautiful, intelligent, and ambitious in ways that made David believe their partnership could transform not just their own lives, but the entire community around them. She had dreams of traveling, of seeing the world beyond Pennsylvania's quiet countryside. David had supported those dreams, encouraged her ambitions, and worked extra hours at the store to save money for the honeymoon trip to Europe that Sarah had always talked about. He had proposed with his grandmother's ring on a perfect spring evening beside the old mill pond, and Sarah had said yes with tears of joy that seemed to promise a lifetime of happiness together in their small-town paradise. David had supported those dreams, encouraged her ambitions, and worked extra hours at the store to save money for the honeymoon trip to Europe that Sarah had always talked about. He had proposed with his grandmother's ring on a perfect spring evening beside the old mill pond, and Sarah had said yes with tears of joy that seemed to promise a lifetime of happiness together in their small-town paradise. But 3 weeks before their wedding, everything changed when Robert Blackwood came to Millbrook. He was a millionaire real estate developer from Philadelphia, scouting locations for a luxury resort that would transform the rural area into something entirely different. Sarah met him at the town planning meeting where David had been opposing the development that would destroy their community's character. Robert was everything that David was not: sophisticated, wealthy, connected to a world of influence and opportunity that existed far beyond the boundaries of small-town Pennsylvania. He wore expensive suits, drove luxury cars, and spoke casually about international business deals that involved more money than David would see in a lifetime of running his family's modest grocery store. The night before their wedding, Sarah came to David's apartment above the grocery store with tears in her eyes and words that would haunt him for the next 30 years. "I can't do this, David," she had whispered, still wearing the wedding dress they had chosen together. "I'm sorry, but I can't marry you. I'm leaving with Robert tomorrow. He's offered me a life I never dreamed possible." David had begged her to reconsider, reminded her of their plans, their dreams, their promises to each other. But Sarah's mind was made up. She removed his grandmother's ring, placed it gently on the kitchen table, and walked out of his life forever. The next morning, while David stood alone at the altar, explaining to their wedding guests what had happened, Sarah was on a plane to Paris. For 30 years, David had carried that betrayal like a weight in his chest, a constant reminder that love wasn't enough when measured against wealth and social status. He had never married, never found anyone who could replace what Sarah had meant to him. He had simply run his store, served his community, and tried to build a meaningful life from the pieces of his shattered dreams. The town had rallied around him in the aftermath, customers showing extra kindness and support during those difficult months when David was learning to live with heartbreak. Gradually, people stopped mentioning Sarah's name, and life in Millbrook settled back into its comfortable rhythms. David became known as the bachelor grocer who would do anything for his neighbors, but had never found love again. Tuesday afternoon, October 15th, started like any other day at Matthew's grocery. David was restocking the produce section when he heard the front door chime, signaling another customer entering the store. He was arranging apples when a voice from behind him asked, "Excuse me, could you tell me how to get to the old Methodist church on Elm Street?" Time stopped completely at the sound of that voice. David's hands froze on the apple he was holding, his entire body going rigid as 30 years of carefully suppressed memories came flooding back with devastating clarity. He knew that voice better than his own heartbeat, had heard it in his dreams and nightmares for 3 decades. Slowly, as if moving through water, he turned around to face the woman who had destroyed his faith in love. Sarah Miller stood in his grocery store, 30 years older, but still recognizably the woman who had left him at the altar. Her blonde hair was streaked with gray now, her face lined with years and experiences that David had not shared. She wore simple clothes that looked expensive but not ostentatious, and her wedding finger was bare except for a pale band of skin where a ring had recently been removed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sarah's eyes widened as she recognized the man she had abandoned 3 decades earlier, the boy she had grown up with who had become a stranger through her own choices. David saw her hands tremble slightly as the full weight of their encounter settled over both of them like a blanket of shared history that neither had expected to face again. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sarah's eyes widened as she recognized the man she had abandoned 3 decades earlier, the boy she had grown up with who had become a stranger through her own choices. David saw her hands tremble slightly as the full weight of their encounter settled over both of them, like a blanket of shared history that neither had expected to face again. "Hello, David," Sarah said softly, her voice carrying the weight of 30 years of regret and uncertainty. I didn't expect to see you here." David almost laughed at the absurdity of her statement. Where else would he be? This store had been his entire world since she had left him with nothing but broken promises and an empty future. "It's my store, Sarah. It's always been my store." Sarah looked around the familiar interior of Matthew's grocery, seeing the same wooden floors, the same hand-painted signs, the same careful attention to community service that David's family had provided for generations. "Of course," she said quietly. "I should have known you'd still be here. You always said this place was part of your soul." Her words carried a mixture of admiration and something like sadness. David studied her face, looking for traces of the young woman who had once promised to love him forever. She was still beautiful, but there was a weariness in her eyes that spoke of disappointments and losses that wealth couldn't prevent. "What are you doing back in Millbrook?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral, despite the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm his carefully constructed defenses. Sarah hesitated, looking down at her hands before meeting his eyes again. "I'm getting divorced," she said simply. "After 30 years of marriage, Robert and I are ... it's over. I came back to Millbrook because I needed somewhere to think, somewhere that felt real after all these years of living in a world that was all about appearances and social obligations." Her honesty surprised them both. David felt a complex mixture of emotions that he couldn't quite identify. Part of him wanted to feel vindicated, to say that he had told her so, that love was more valuable than money. But mostly, he just felt sad for the broken woman standing in his store, asking for directions to the church, where they should have been married 3 decades ago. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said, and meant it. "Are you?" Sarah asked, studying his face for signs of satisfaction or revenge that never appeared. "I wouldn't blame you if you weren't sorry. I know what I did to you, David. I've known every day for 30 years. Her voice broke slightly on the last words, revealing a vulnerability that reminded David of the girl he had fallen in love with so long ago, before money and status changed everything. David set down the apple he had been holding and really looked at Sarah for the first time since she had walked back into his life. She was 58 now, the same age he was, and he could see the toll that 3 decades of privileged but apparently loveless marriage had taken on her. "Why the church?" he asked gently. "Why did you want directions to our church?" He didn't need to explain which church. Sarah's eyes filled with tears that she quickly tried to blink away. "Because I wanted to see where we should have gotten married," she whispered. "I wanted to remember what it felt like to believe in forever, before I learned that money can't buy the kind of happiness we had planned together. I know it's selfish, but I needed to feel connected to the person I used to be, before I made the worst mistake of my life." David felt his carefully maintained anger begin to crack, replaced by something he hadn't expected to feel toward Sarah ever again: compassion. "You didn't make a mistake," he said quietly. "You made a choice. We all have to live with our choices, Sarah. You chose the life you thought you wanted." But even as he said the words, he could see the pain in her eyes that suggested her choice hadn't brought happiness. "I was 27 years old and terrified of being trapped in a small town for the rest of my life," Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Robert offered me everything I thought I wanted: travel, luxury, status, excitement. I was too young and too stupid to realize that I already had everything I actually needed right here with you. By the time I understood that, it was too late to come back." David leaned against the produce counter, feeling suddenly exhausted by the weight of this conversation. He had imagined having thousands of times, but never thought would actually occur. "Too late according to who?" he asked. "I waited for you, Sarah. I waited for years, thinking maybe you'd realize your mistake and come home. But you never did. You built a life without me, and I learned to build one without you." "Did you ever marry?" Sarah asked, though she seemed to already know the answer from the way David carried himself, the way he spoke about his solitary life. David shook his head slowly. "No, I never found anyone who made me want to take that risk again. After what happened with us, I decided it was safer to focus on the store, on serving the community, on building something that couldn't leave me." Sarah's face crumpled with guilt and regret as she realized the full impact of her decision 30 years ago. "Oh, David, I'm so sorry. I never meant to destroy your faith in love. I just ... I was selfish and scared and young." David watched her struggle with emotions that seemed genuine, but he wasn't sure if his heart was strong enough to risk believing in her again, after all these years of protective numbness. "What do you want from me, Sarah?" David asked directly, needing to understand why she had really come back to Millbrook. "Do you want forgiveness? Do you want to remember the past? Do you want to try to explain 30 years of silence?" His voice wasn't angry, just tired and cautious, like someone who had learned to protect himself from hope that might lead to disappointment once again. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering his question with the seriousness it deserved. "I want to make amends," she said finally. "I know I can't undo what I did or give you back the life I stole from you. But I want you to know that leaving you was the worst decision I ever made, and not a day has passed that I haven't regretted it. You deserved so much better than what I gave you." David studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-serving motives, but he saw only genuine remorse and the kind of deep sadness that comes from living with the consequences of choices that can't be undone. "I appreciate that," he said carefully. "But apologies don't change the past, Sarah. We're both different people now. I'm not the young man who was ready to conquer the world with you." "I know," Sarah replied. "I'm not asking you to forgive me or to pretend that we can go back to what we were. I just ... I wanted you to know that the life I chose instead of you wasn't worth the price I paid for it. Money and status and social position. None of it filled the emptiness I created when I walked away from real love. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I threw it away." David felt something shift inside his chest, a loosening of the tight knot of anger and resentment he had carried for 3 decades. "Why now?" he asked. "Why are you telling me this now, after all this time?" Sarah looked toward the window, watching the familiar streets of Millbrook, where they had grown up together, where they had planned to build their life before everything changed. "Because Robert filed for divorce," Sarah said quietly. "He found someone younger, someone who doesn't remind him that we're getting old. After 30 years of marriage, I discovered that the security I thought I was buying was just an illusion. I realized that the only real love I ever had was what I walked away from in this store, in this town, with you." David felt his heart break all over again, not for himself this time, but for the woman who had spent 30 years learning the difference between being chosen for love and being chosen for convenience. "I'm sorry you had to learn that lesson the hard way," he said gently, "but I'm glad you learned it. Some people never do." He paused, studying her face. "What are you going to do now?" Sarah shrugged, looking lost in a way that reminded David of the young woman who used to come to him with her problems and dreams. "I don't know. Start over, I guess. Try to figure out who I am when I'm not Mrs. Robert Blackwood anymore. Maybe remember who Sarah Miller used to be before she got so confused about what really matters in life." She looked at him hopefully. "Maybe learn to forgive myself." David made a decision that surprised him as much as it clearly surprised Sarah. "The church is 3 blocks down Elm Street," he said softly. "But if you want to remember what we used to have, don't go alone. Let me close the store early and walk with you. Not to go back, but to finally say goodbye to what might have been. Maybe we both need that kind of closure." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she nodded, understanding that David was offering her something precious, the chance to honor their past without trying to reclaim it. Sometimes healing doesn't mean going back. It means learning to carry love forward in a new form. David Matthews had spent 30 years learning that some doors close forever, but others open to unexpected grace. Subscribe to hear more stories of love, loss, and second chances.